I'm Matt Gray, and I'm joined weekly by Dr. J. We're both certified financial planners, and we talk about how child-free life impacts your finances. This is Child-Free Life and Money.
Matt Gray here with Dr. J on episode 7 of Child-Free Life and Money. Today, Dr. J, we are going to be covering one of the more opportunistic parts of being child-free, something that we're allowed to take advantage of or maybe have the benefit to take advantage of. And that's really looking at risk and reward in our lives and how we can do things that maybe people with kids couldn't because of the riskiness of it. And so we'll kind of dive into that. But do you have any preliminary thoughts on, as a child-free person, you can do some things in life maybe that you wouldn't normally be able to if you had children or if you had someone to take care of like that?
Yeah, so I was doing research for my book, Portraits of Child-Free Wealth. I asked the question, what does it mean to live a life of child-free wealth? And I asked a whole lot of people, hundreds of responses, survey, interviews, all that. Bottom line, child-free wealth means you have the time, money, and freedom to do what you want.
Right.
Now, that sounds really fun, easy, all that. That doesn't mean you're rich. Like, people still have income disparities, all that. But what I found is actually if you have the time, money, and freedom, then people are like, now what? Like, what do I want my life to look like? What is it? And it's just a moment like, what do I really want? And I think when we look at these risks and reward, my question is, cool, you're taking a risk. Great. Why?
Yeah.
And they're like,
Right. I think I say quite often that, when you have that goal of reaching financial independence or whatever that is for you, once you get there, you've been pursuing that goal for so long. Lots of times you kind of forget why you were pursuing that goal. But I try to remind people that, hey, when you're child free, like rules are for kids. When you're child free, you don't really have all these rules about, you've got to settle down in one place or you have to, work a career for 40 years. Like any of that stuff that you're taught or is normalized when you're younger doesn't apply to you really. I mean, you can structure whatever life you want. It's completely up to you. Whatever you want to do, you could break those boundaries. And when people really can get into that thought process, maybe once they've started getting to that point where they've got time, money, freedom, all that, they go, oh, okay, well, then what do I want to do? And that's where I think there's an opportunity for child-free people to be much more, I don't know the best way to describe it, take on much more risk, not just from like a financial perspective, which is completely different, but from a life perspective. I'm going to go try to be a digital nomad for the next 2 or 3 years, or I'm going to try to start my own wine shop or something, or maybe I'm going to join the Peace Corps at 40, or I don't know, whatever people want to do, great. And I think those risks can often pay off in many different types of rewards. The main reason a lot of people, or maybe not the main, but one of the significant reasons is to get that freedom, to have a more fulfilling life this way. They can do it. And so I guess when we kind of talk about that risk and reward, we talk about it all the time, or especially as financial planners, that financial planning is not about getting more money in your bank account. It's about allowing you to live the ideal life, like the life that you want to lead, and money just supports that. So being child-free, being able to take risks, and doing whatever the big bucket list you have, do you see more of your clients doing things, maybe not, I wouldn't call them wild, but more ambitious things when it comes to their lives, the way they structure their lives, anything like that?
Well, I think it's just a different way of life. So everything you just listed is what we would call the standard life script. You go to school, you get a job, you get married, you have kids, you grow up your kids, you retire, you give them that's the standard life script. Which my argument is, if you've decided to be child free or you're childless or whatever circumstances got you there, then why are you following the rest of the script?
Right.
And it's like, well, and it's funny. I have these meetings all the time with people. I'm like, cool, what's your goals? Great, we'll work through all this. And it takes a while. And I'm like, all right, let's do that. And they're like, no, I meant like eventually. I'm like, no, let's do it now.
Right.
And that's where they're like, And I'll give you my life example. So my wife and I are both PhDs, and finding 2 careers for PhDs at the same time, same level, same places is nearly impossible. So we've embraced what we call the gardener and the rose. One of us is growing, that's the rose, and one's the gardener, providing support. So my wife got a job opportunity 1,200 miles away. That is an ideal thing for her career. And we picked up everything and moved to Mississippi. Now, this is in a pre-Roe world, back when Roe still existed. Now I am in a post-Roe world, running a financial planning firm in the poorest state in the country that is focused on child-free. Let's just say that was not great planning, but it works out for us because it's the right opportunity for my wife, and it's her turn to be the Rose, and we can do that. And I mean, literally, I'll give you an idea of how crazy this was. So in academics, it takes about 6 months for job search and all that. So in December, it's kind of like, all right, let's look at the market. She got a job offer in April. We flew out that weekend, took a look at went out with realtors, like look at 20 places, I don't know nothing about Mississippi, just got to go. And by June, we had sold our other house, packed up, threw the dogs in the back of the Prius. Now you guys see two mastiffs in the back of our Prius. That's a separate discussion. But we just drove 1,200 miles and moved, and we caught. And if you had kids, that would just not have happened. Now, we're a year later, and my wife just said, "You know what? This is great." Because at the time, when we were like in the middle of the change, you're just so wrapped up in it, you never know what's going to happen. But it's better for her. It's a better opportunity for her, better career for her. Cool. For me, I can work around it. I meet via Zoom, so I can meet people anywhere. Some of the politics, that's a different discussion. But, it works, and we could take that risk. And I said to her, look, in worst case, it doesn't work out, we'll move somewhere else. And that's just like, I mean, we're fortunate. We have no debt. We do well. We can do it financially. But that's just the level of risk that's okay for a child-free couple. I'm 44. She's a little younger than me. And by the way, you don't share your wife's age. That's one of those things I'll teach you tricks, Matt. Don't share those on podcasts. But, if something went wrong, cool. Let's restart and try again. You can do that as child-free people.
So yeah, you just commented twice. You brought up the idea of like, oh, well, if it doesn't work out, we'll try again. And I think maybe that is one of those things that truly is the luxury of being child-free is, and maybe give me your perspective on this. You can afford to fail. A failure is not the end of the line. Whereas if you have kids, maybe you couldn't take the risk the first time around because you couldn't afford to fail. There was no option to fail. And so you just never take the risk in the first place. Whereas being child-free, you could say, you know what? I'm going to go, we're going to pack up, we're going to move to Mississippi, we're going to throw a couple of giant dogs in the back of our tiny car, and we're going to drive 1,200 miles, and we're going to see what happens. And to your point earlier, we talked a little bit about risk and reward. You've now been rewarded in that your wife said things are going well, enjoying the position. You're able to make your business work well from where you are just fine. And it seems like everything's settling in as good or better than what was planned originally, to the point where you're reaping the benefits of taking that risk at this point. Your lives are full and all of that. So yeah, maybe do you think people can afford to fail more easily, but also are the rewards bigger because you can take bigger risks? I guess I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they can afford to fail, but I asked this question to them when they're holding themselves back from taking a risk. Say, are you more worried about fear of failure or fear of success?
Right.
By the way, 9 times out of 10, success actually is the issue, not failure.
Right.
Because I think there is kind of like, if I failed, I could do something else. Like, that's not as much of a fear for many people. And I deal with child-free people. So, I mean, just that within that population. But I think it's just one of those things where maybe the fear holds us back or whatever. And like, we're actually more comfortable kind of like, just following the path we're on and not swerving. Like, that's how people, I want to start a cupcake shop. Well, let's do it.
Right.
Like, well, but those don't make much money. Oh, it's okay. Do it somewhere where it's cheap to do it. Like, and they're like, well, but I've studied for this and I have this degree. And I'm like, cool. Does that make you happy? Yeah. I'm using Marie Kondo now. Does that bring you joy?
Yeah.
No. Well, then let's go do the cupcake shop.
Right.
And they're like, and then I'll hear, but that'll hold back my retirement. I go, well, if you enjoy the cupcake shop, would you want to retire? No. Well, then who cares?
Yeah.
Let's just do it.
Exactly.
And there's always this moment where they just start staring at me at the screen like, I've run out
Shit,
of
are we
things
doing this?
yeah, it's kind of like you're the dog that caught the car. Like I could, but and by the way, I've been tracking this. When I get people to that point where I'm like, here, you could get your goals. It takes about 3 months before they actually do it. And I say that because like the first month is kind of like, all right, let me double check your math. Like I always get one of those moments.
Right.
Then the math works out, and then they're like, do I really want to change?
Right.
And especially in couples, there's this moment of like, are we really doing this?
Right. Yeah.
And then the third time I meet with everybody monthly, the third time I meet with them, they go, all right, what do we got to do? It's like, let's go. And the way I say it is create the life you want, then figure out the finances to go with it.
Right.
So if you want to run that cupcake shop, it might mean you have to give up that fancy car. I'm making it up, but something you might have to give something, but it's worth it. The other thing is you are probably a better investment than the stock market. And now I know we're financial planners. We're not supposed to say,
whoa.
Yeah, we're supposed to put everything in the stock market. But look, let's invest in you and your business or your idea or your life or going back to school. That's going to have a better return on investment, both in money and in joy. And that's what people are like, huh?
Right.
Like, well, how do I measure that? Well, I don't know. That one we can't measure as much, but really, does adding another zero to your bank account make you happy? Or how about you go open that cupcake shop you always want to do?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think you bring up a great point, which is I think so many people get caught up in the idea that, money is the end game or whatever else it is, like, retirement is the end game. When realistically, I always try to remind people that happiness is the end game. And then you reverse engineer that and you go, okay, well, what does happiness come from? Oh, internet connection's unstable. Are you there?
Yeah, you locked up completely. Now you're back.
Cool. All right. Well, we'll rewind, reset. I'm going to go back fairly far for cutting purposes. But I always try to remind people.
We were at the cupcake shop is when it locked up.
The cupcake shop? Man, I said,
yeah, go ahead and do that. And you're like, oh, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I was going to say, I always try to remind clients that happiness is the end game. Like that's the point of everything that we do. And when you reverse engineer from happiness, okay, well, how do you get happiness? And there are plenty of studies on what brings happiness, but let's just simplify it to living the life that you want to lead. Great. And the money is meant to support that. So, I mean, happiness is the end game and there's multiple steps to get there. So when people say things like, okay, well, you can afford to start the cupcake shop because that's the life you want to lead and that will bring you happiness. Nothing else should supersede that. Like that's technically the whole point. Like that's what we're doing this for. And I think that's such a good reminder to not get caught up on steps 1 or 2 to reach step 3. Like you're still going for step 3 and whatever is going to get you there fastest is, or in a way to make it as the longevity of your happiness to be around for a while. Like that's really what the goal is. And so it's a good point to say, take the risk if it brings you that reward of happiness. You've saved, you've worked hard, you've done these things to be able to afford to go do that, or whatever else it is you've trained in something. Go now, do that and see if it brings you happiness. Do that. And you have that opportunity to take those bigger risks.
Yeah. And Matt, you and I both started our financial planning firms about the same time. And that's actually how, for backstory, that's actually how Matt and I met. We were in a mastermind group of places that started. And I just read a stat the other day that only about 15% of new financial planners or registered investment advisory firms make it. So, okay, cool. So we both took a chance that 85% says we're going to fail.
Yeah.
Why'd you do that, Matt?
Well, my story is a little bit unique in terms of why I did that. But I think, all right, oh man, you're going to get me on a monologue here. So let's see how quickly I can wrap this up. First and foremost, financial planners, I think as a whole, at this point in the industry, you can either have the very reliable, safe job of being an employee advisor and do just fine and make a reasonable career out of it. But if you ever want to really have control over your career and your earnings potential, things like that, you've got to start your own firm. So you'll find, I think, typically more ambitious advisors or ones who can take on more risk will say, I'm going to go start my own firm and see what happens. If I fail, same thing. Great. I'm out, 5 figures or something. So savings, and I'll work for an extra 1.5 years towards the end of my career or something. So I wanted that from fairly early on in my career to start my own firm. And I understood that. So I kind of started preparing for that relatively early. But then I had a serious medical diagnosis when in 2019 I was diagnosed with kidney failure. I was on dialysis for multiple years and then had a kidney transplant in 2021. And I didn't have any epiphany. I didn't have anything like that that was this crazy, like, oh, life's changing, life's fleeting, or anything like that. I actually had kind of the moment when I was in the hospital, not sure if I was going to be getting out of the hospital ever, either in a body bag or walking out. I wasn't sure. And so I was sitting there with that. I naturally came to that question of, what do I regret? Like, what didn't I do? And the question kept coming back. Like, the answer was always, well, you didn't ever try to launch your own firm. You didn't ever try. And so I was transplanted May of 2021. I was on medical leave until August of 2021. I launched my firm in September of 2021. And so, yeah, I went straight into launching that firm, knew the risks associated, but I also looked at it without having kids and said, what's the worst that can happen? What, I'm out 50 grand in a year? And then, to your point, I go get another job. I don't know, like, I'm perfectly hireable. So the risk, because I don't have kids, seemed much smaller, and the reward seemed so outsized compared to the risk.
You know, that's it. That's a much more impressive story than mine. But I'm just I'm like, man, that's terrible to follow up. But the thing is, what you're saying is, okay, cool. You're willing to take a chance of failure, which, you know,
a likelihood of failure.
Yeah, I mean, like 15% of firms make it. By the way, I don't have. Matt had a much longer background in the financial. I come out of the coaching world, so I come more out of the behavioral side. I come out of healthcare, a few others into finance. So I'll be honest, I didn't know that 85% of firms fail. I was doing coaching, love it, and wanted to add in more finance because people want to dig into that, and there's some legalese around why you have to be registered and all that. But the thing is, let's be real, Matt, you knew the likelihood of success versus failure when you set out. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, and particularly I'd call myself more of like a technical expert. A lot of my career has been spent really getting into the technical aspects and research of financial planning to really understand those ins and outs. I'm not a salesperson, and anyone who ever tells you anything about launching your own business of any kind is sell, sell, sell. Like, that's what you have to go. You have to go out and get customers, get clients, whatever you need to do. And knowing that I'm a technical expert and not a salesperson, I think the odds are probably even less in my favor, realistically. So yeah, I knew the odds were not great, but I think for my own fulfillment and happiness, it was, give it a shot. You've got to try. And again, failure was, and like the financial cost and time and all that stuff was so inconsequential relative to the happiness and fulfillment an attempt would bring me, I think. And being able to recognize that allowed me to just say, screw it, I'm going for it, and I think there's that opportunity for many child-free people. And again, not all, right? Some are in really tough situations. They're taking care of parents, they're working 2 jobs and barely making ends meet. Maybe they can't afford to take much risk, but there are, I think, plenty out there who can, once they get over that mindset, which may be where your behavioral aspect and coaching side can really get them over the hump quite well into that idea of, let's start and re-engineering our lives to what we want it to be.
Well, so yeah, we're talking about the high end and starting your business. Let me talk about a different end. So I met with somebody recently who having some trouble, not making, making the bills, and worried about debt and credit and all that. Trying to figure out a better housing crisis right now are stupid expensive.
Right.
And finally got to a point, and I said, hey, have you thought about moving? They were like, well, I said, did you know there's actually a site called Make Me Move where they have a list of cities paying you to move to them. Mm-hmm. If you have a remote job, you can move. And they're like I was looking at to move to Indiana, it's like $9,000 to move to Indiana, and you get access to this and that. I was like, that's awesome.
Yeah.
You know what? We could do it. But this happened to be somebody who's single. You know what? I can work remotely from anywhere, and let me move to nowhere, Indiana. I don't remember where it was. But my point is, we can do that and change our life and take the risk. So we also get some rewards with it. I think the other part of it is, though, what Matt and I actually do demonstrate is we're both financial people. We both understand the numbers and still took a pretty risky risk. Numbers say don't do this.
Don't do it. Yeah, exactly.
But for quality of life, so for me, I need a job that's flexible because I'm providing support to my wife.
Correct.
That's kind of part of the nature of it. I need to make my own schedule. I need to be able to help her. I need to be able to do whatever in the house. Cool. So I needed something that was flexible.
Mm.
Now, for us, it's less about the money. You know, we could live off of one salary. It's not the big deal there. I joke, but it's true. I'm working for a boat, Nordhaven 51. It's about $2 million once it's all said, and I'm going to travel the world. I mean, and that's where I'm going. And my wife and I say, when it's my turn to be the Rose, which is 15 years down the road or so, we're traveling the world.
Mm-hmm.
Well, all the money I make is going towards there. So I'm not doing it for the money. I'm doing it because it fits my life and I can provide support to my wife.
Right.
You know, and that's why I'm willing to take the risk.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's just a different set. You know, people go, well, I'm very conservative or moderate and again, investing in risk. Like the numbers don't tell the story of what you need to do and then what you're going to get out at the end.
Right. Right. Yeah, I think we did take big risks in looking in the face of it, but it was all because, well, again, I'll continue to say it, and I think a lot of people will downplay it, but we have the luxury of being able to afford to fail, ultimately, but also
or afford to succeed.
Well, yeah,
we look at the challenge that one.
That's fine. Yeah, we can afford to succeed too, but I think it didn't mean the end of our dreams or goals if we did fail. But I completely agree with you on that. But I think they both were moves to become happier and to potentially elevate our fulfillment within life. And I think that's what drives that decision. And it's kind of a no-brainer when like we can exponentially increase your happiness or fulfillment for a small risk small risk because of our life situation, not having kids. Fair enough. I've seen it fairly recently where, I have one client I mentioned in our last episode where one works 2 days a week and the other one works a full schedule. That's purely because she doesn't want to work. Just doesn't work that much. Yeah, occasionally has some training, does it, but would rather not. And they're able to make it work so where she doesn't have to work. Then I recently wrote a plan for some clients where one of the partners wants to retire very early and the other one wants to work until she can't, basically. And so it's really interesting to see how those dynamics play out where you can build these plans, you can take these risks, people leave to go do this or that, and it still fits their lives and whatever they want to design their life. So have you seen, well, there's the one, if they did that client you spoke about that moved to Indiana, that'd be a pretty big one. But do you see any others in the clients that you've worked with that is anything fairly remarkable or things that you wouldn't typically see with like families, traditional families with children, things like that?
Yeah, so I just wrote an article about this also because I've seen a lot of couples lately looking at this Gardener and the Rose approach and having one person take a sabbatical, taking 6 months to find themselves to figure out what they want to do. And part of it is we're on the gerbil wheel forever. So we're like, you know, we can never think. So the sabbatical, the way I recommend it, first 2 months are watching Netflix. And I literally mean doing nothing, just get your brain to stop.
Right.
Then it's 2 months about what do I want to be? You know, I joke, what do I want to be when I grow up? But it doesn't matter what your age, it's just what do you want to be? And then it's 2 months figuring out how to get there. You know, so it's networking, it's, you know, it's shadowing people, it's whatever. And it's a luxury, let's be real, that child-free folks can take. And some singles can do it if they have enough money in the emergency fund to do it also. To really take a pause for 6 months and go, what do I want the rest of my life to look like? And that itself is a risk. And then they end up taking a risk to go with it. But the reward is through the roof. And in the Gardener and the Rose, part of the intent is we're going to swap roles in a couple. So I'll do it now, you do it later, you know, okay, let's follow that. And what happens is people go, well, that's going to hurt my earnings over years. I'm like, that's fine.
Right.
You know, take 6 months for yourself. You're fine.
Right.
You know, and I think that's just something that we can do. I'm not sure if parents could do it. You know, it's just, you know, could you take 6 months off to find yourself while you're taking care of 3 kids? It's going to be hard. Yeah. You know, might not be impossible, but it's going to be hard.
Right.
But find it out what brings you joy. Everything else goes away and then go towards that. You know, so some of those examples, I got people going back to school. Some of the people, what they're actually doing is they're shadowing other people. Like, hey, I wish I had this job. Let me go follow that person for a week. and see, and is that really what it is? And some people is like, hey, my passion was always art or whatever. Let's go do that.
Right.
And people go, well, can I really? Yeah.
Right.
Art, by the way, I've heard a lot, quite a few different people, all different types of art. And I'm like, if you're an artist at heart, why are you slaving on a computer, doing whatever job, answering email?
Right. Yeah.
They're like, well, art doesn't pay. I'm like, you're right. You'll probably never make a huge pay as an artist. Would you be happier? Yes. Well, then
let's make it work.
Maybe it means you have to downsize your house. Okay.
Right.
Would you be happier? Yes. Let's go do it.
Right. I'm getting feelings of Fight Club. I bought all the stuff. I had everything I needed. I built this life that I was supposed to be happy, and I still wasn't happy. And you're like, yeah, fair enough. Got to find out what's important. And like you said, Dr. J. Kondo Zygmunt here saying, what brings you joy? And I think that's true. Like, really, what does bring you happiness, and how do you pursue that? And sometimes it involves taking risks, but ultimately that reward is going to be outsized. And I think, admittedly, part of that equation is not having kids makes the risk smaller, which makes the proportion of reward that much greater, which encourages us maybe to take some of these risks. So, really interesting stuff here in terms of how that can affect your life. And if you are concerned about the money side, of course, both of us are CFPs, and we help people navigate these discussions all day, every day. It's what we do. And so I think pursuing that end goal of happiness is really the point of, you live to be happy. You don't sacrifice forever. And there are multiple reasons why we want to pursue that as soon as possible. So with that, any final thoughts here on risk and reward, Dr. J?
I think the other one is, if you're going to take a big risk, you better have the reward. So if you're taking a big risk because, you want to have a lot of money, well, then what?
Right.
You have a goal versus,
right.
Hey, I want to pass it on.
Yeah. I think, as always, the very end goal, what's the money for, is more of the question. But very good point. Have the plan in place, and then start working for it. Yep. Thanks, everyone, for joining. We'll be back again next week.
Child-Free Life and Money is an educational and entertainment podcast only. For further disclosure, look at our websites at www.anthrophywealth.com or www.childfreewealth.com. Either way, consult with your financial planner to see if anything we discuss pertains to you. Thanks for listening.